Max Verstappen stuns McLaren with an overtake of the ages to win the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix as Lewis Hamilton fights back from 12th on the grid to almost deliver Ferrari a famous Imola podium. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks as the imagined Tifosi, who are quite happy, I would have thought, leaving behind you a very nice background. A good day for them. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but we've got to start with the man of the moment, Max Verstappen, who, an overtake of the ages on Oscar Piastri around the outside of the first corner, and to put it simply, he then cleared off into the distance.
Mighty Max, magnificent Max, mammoth Max, throw all the alliterations to go with that Max first name, to describe what this guy can do behind the wheel of a car. Because let's face it, it wasn't a great launch, and even he has admitted that. And it looked like, for all the world, there was no way he was going to produce the overtake he eventually did going through that first chicane. It was just stupendous. Oscar Piastri has conceded that he did brake a little late, but that's all the invitation a driver like Max Verstappen needs to pull off a maneuver like that. In fairness to Oscar as well, he didn't really get his elbows out. He could have done, who knows what might have happened if he'd have done that. He kept it clean. So a little doff of the cap towards Oscar for doing so, because we have seen incidents there in the past going through that first chicane. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, I remember rightly, back in 2021. And yes, so fair play to Oscar, but nevertheless, what another magnificent maneuver from Max Verstappen. And as you say, that pretty much was it for all intents and purposes. We had a VSC when Esteban Ocon pulled over on track for a technical issue with his car that gave Max a free pit stop that played into his hands a little bit. But there was late drama to come when we had Kimi Antonelli, so unfortunate for him, on his debut at his home circuit here at Imola, also incurring technical issues. And with about 17 laps to go, if I recall, Nick, I think it was, the safety car was summoned then. That bunched up all the field, and it threatened to give us a sprint race here towards the finish. Nevertheless, Max once again just disappeared, and instead he left the McLarens of Piastri and Norris to fight over the second and third positions. Norris eventually holding sway late on with a good overtake on Oscar. He did have a tyre advantage, of course, but nevertheless, it has bunched up that top three in the championship standings now. And if there was any doubt at all coming into this Grand Prix that it was just edging towards a McLaren battle between Oscar and Lando, this was completely dispelled by this Grand Prix today. And even Max himself was surprised by the performance of his Red Bull, that he was able to do what he did. Now, obviously, Imola is quite a unique circuit in many respects, giving its characteristics, but it looks, for all intents and purposes, that on the back of this drive here today, but on the back of this performance, just when we were beginning to write him off again, write Red Bull off again after Friday practice, which really wasn't to the best for either party, Max and Red Bull come roaring back. As I say, make no mistake, Max Verstappen is firmly in this title battle, and hopefully that'll be the way going forward, and to give us what could be a truly great battle royale of the remaining 17 Grand Prix of this season.
And Helmut Marko confirmed that Red Bull's upgrades very much work, and actually its time management was massively improved, actually better than McLaren in Imola, which is unheard of this season. McLaren, that's been their big advantage when it comes to race pace. But what's really interesting, and we'll mention him now quickly, it wasn't just in the hands of Max Verstappen where the Red Bull actually looked competitive. Yuki Tsunoda, after a disastrous Saturday, that's being kind to him in all fairness, recovered from a pit lane start to pick up a point in 10th at a circuit which is notorious for being, well, near impossible to overtake at.
Yeah, what a comeback from Yuki Tsunoda. Great drive at the end after what was a shocking performance from him in qualifying. He was beating himself up after what he did. He said that he tried to be a hero on that occasion, and in the end, he ended up destroying that RB21. Very lucky to come out of it unscathed. As we saw, he barrel rolled over a barrier of force, but it left his team with a mammoth rebuild task, his engineers and his technicians, to get that car ready for the race today. Ultimately, he was starting from a pit lane because he incurred power unit penalties as well because of the component changes to that car. Those component changes made him depart from A, so that naturally led to the pit lane start. But what a great performance. And it can take something positive away from this Grand Prix weekend, because as I say, he wasn't in a happy place on Saturday afternoon, who can at least console himself to a certain extent with a job well done on Sunday and at least bringing home a point. He knows he's got it within him to perform. Hopefully, we're going to see a little bit more now from Yuki Tsunoda over the coming races. Hopefully, as I say, he can take something away from this and rebuild with Red Bull going forward and lend Max Verstappen the hand that he will now really need going forward if he is to launch that title battle against Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris.
And of course, a team, as you've just mentioned, who have got a bit of thinking to do now is, in my eyes, McLaren. An interesting performance. It felt that Oscar sounded frustrated, rightly so, having started, of course, from pole position, finishing third. Strategy didn't quite go in his favour with the timing of that VSC for Esteban Ocon. But McLaren, this is one surely they should have won.
It was a very interesting one, as you mentioned it, but simply because of the tyre management. Okay, yes, Oscar was passed by Max, as we've discussed, brilliant manoeuvre going for the first chicane. However, you would have assumed from everything that we've seen so far this season that McLaren's greater tyre management would lend itself to Oscar slowly reeling Max in and ultimately either getting close enough to do an overcut or at least passing him on track. It never happened. In the end, where, if you remember rightly as well, Oscar radioed in to asking about the strategy and was told that we don't think plan A is going to work. So you kind of got to figure that plan A was going to be the one stop. It obviously ultimately led to him making that earlier than planned pit stop. Yet, regardless, Lando Norris managed to eke out his tyres until, of course, we had that VSC following the Esteban Ocon incident around about lap 27 or 28, if I remember correctly. And bit of a warning sign this for McLaren, and Lando Norris has said it himself. Bearing in mind the way the tyre management unfolded at this particular circuit, he feels now it's something that, despite everything that has gone previously over the first 6 Grand Prix, he feels this is a little bit of a wake-up call for McLaren in terms of what they need to do with regard to tyre management to ensure that they can stay on top of it. Because if this was an indicator that Red Bull, with its new upgrades, they're working well, that they've been able to slowly bring their tyres to life to eke out the life in them going forward, then without a shadow of a doubt, McLaren are into real battle against Max Verstappen and Red Bull now. If this is any indicator of what we've got going forward, as I say, for the coming Grand Prix. Monaco, as we know, the next race next weekend is always that outlier. It's a street circuit. Let's not read too much into that. But once we get to Barcelona in particular, a track that everybody knows like the back of their hand, that is going to give us the perfect indicator as to what might happen beyond that for the rest of the season.
And of course, in Barcelona as well, we'll have the new front wing technical director. So
Exactly.
Who knows what impact that's going to have.
Well, might play a spot. We'll see.
Time will tell. One team who you think are going to be leaving Imola pretty happy after a pretty miserable start to the weekend is Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton recovering from 12th to finish in 4th. Charles Leclerc from 11th to 6th. However, he complained that once again getting, in his words, basically screwed over by a virtual safety car, that he just doesn't seem to have any luck with these stoppages effectively. But Lewis in particular, really, really good race pace, which we have seen at times this season.
Yeah, the conditions, the setup, Lewis could not have been happy. I spoke to him afterwards in the pen, obviously surrounded by a massive group of media, as you can appreciate. And I have to say, since the day he signed, this was the happiest I have seen Lewis Hamilton speaking post whatever sprint, even after his China sprint win and post Grand Prix. Naturally so, he was delighted. And you can imagine as well, for these Ferrari fans behind us, they will be happy, bearing in mind where, as you've mentioned, where Charles and Lewis qualified after what was a dismal Saturday for the team. Both Aston Martins ahead, both Williams ahead, Isaac Hadjar ahead in his racing balls. And it was a case of what on earth are Ferrari going to deliver on race day? So Lewis, everything came together. It was that window that we've talked about with this Ferrari car so far this season. It's very narrow, and for once, Lewis, the team, got everything right. Lewis talked about the communication with his race engineer being absolutely spot on, calm, crisp, clear communication between the two of them. And yes, there was a little element of luck with the way the safety car, the VSC played out, as we've discussed. But nevertheless, Lewis showed tremendous pace when it mattered most, and that elevated him up to that fourth position. And Oscar Piastri, on older tyres, considerably older tyres, a few laps longer, 2-3 more, Lewis would have been on that podium. And oh my goodness me, could you imagine what this place would have been like if there'd been a roof? It probably would have been lifted off if Lewis had stood on that podium today. Not quite 1.4 seconds shy come the checkered flag, but at least something for Ferrari, for Lewis, and Charles to an extent to now work on, to build on. And as I say, Monaco, not quite sure what's going to happen there for Ferrari. Lewis has talked about the car not being good in low speed. Monaco is all about low speed. So it could be a tricky weekend. It could be a very tricky qualifying because, as we know, Monaco qualifying is also ever so important, regardless of the fact that we've got this new two-stop strategy mandate being implemented for that weekend. I think once we get to Barcelona the week after, that is going to be the true telltale sign of where everybody is in this pecking order. Bearing in mind now we're getting these raft of updates that have come on the cars. We're going to see a few more as well for the Circuit de Catalunya. That's going to play a part. And then pretty soon after that, all the teams are going to start to shut down their 25 programs and focus on 26. So there's still a lot to look forward to, a lot to play for over these next couple of races.
Ferrari actually released some footage on social media after the race of Lewis actually going to greet the Tifosi who'd gone on to the start-finish straight for the podium, being serenaded with chants towards Lewis as well. So it's fair to say that the Tifosi approve of his performance today.
Additionally, Nick, just one lovely little additional line from Lewis. As the drivers' parade took place, and obviously, as we know, the drivers are stood on the back of the truck on this occasion. Just one of the old-fashioned drivers' parades, not like the Lego cars that we saw in Miami. Unfortunately, not. But as you know, with the drivers' parades take place, the drivers are pretty much chatting to themselves, or they're doing it. Formula One TV interviews, of course. Not Lewis today. He said that on the back of the drivers' parade truck, he wanted to take it all in. He wanted to look at all the fans dressed in their Ferrari red, to wave to the fans. He said he was taking images. When it went past the Senna Monument here, he made sure he got an image of that from the drivers' parade truck. He soaked it all in. And you get the impression that in doing that, he fed off that. And yes, while it was not quite Silverstone, where he knows that the fans there are rooting in particular for him because he's British, nevertheless, he fed off the fervor of the Ferrari fans here because he knows what it means to be a Ferrari driver to the Tifosi, and he delivered today. So at least something positive for Lewis, Ferrari, and as I say, Charles, to work on and progress going through now to the rest of the season.
For certain, just to go through very quickly, the top 10 from the race in Imola. Max Verstappen was victorious, ahead of Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri in third, Hamilton in fourth, Alex Albon in fifth. That's back-to-back P5s for the Thai driver. Charles Leclerc in sixth, George Russell in seventh, Carlos Sainz eighth, Isaac Hadjar in ninth, and Yuki Tsunoda P10. Ian, Alex Albon, Williams in general, but let's focus on Alex because that is now back-to-back P5 finishes. At one point, even looked like maybe a podium would be on the cards despite all the odds. Despite no upgrades, they've got some car this season.
It's not bad, is it? It's working supremely well, and as we've seen across all the tracks. Now, I asked Carlos post-qualifying, I asked Alex post-race, have you been surprised by what this car is delivering this season? And both have said yes. And then Alex mitigated that by saying, but I really shouldn't have done because of everything that James Vowles was talking to us about pre-season. Everything that James did talk to him about has been delivered and then some. And as you mentioned, behind that safety car, Alex thought he got a real shot at a podium because he knew he was on far fresher tyres than, in particular, Oscar Piastri ahead of him, who was actually second at that point when the safety car restart took place with 17 I don't know, 9 laps to go, I think, wasn't it? Some 9 or 10
It was
laps
a
to go.
long safety car period.
So yeah, instead, unfortunately for Alex, he found himself fending off initially the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. And as we saw at one stage, Charles forcing Alex off into the gravel. Although that lifted Charles into fourth place, he had to give the place back because it was an unfair maneuver. In fairness to Alex, he was asked about that, and he did turn around and say, if I'd have been in Charles' position, I would have done exactly the same thing. Unfortunately for Alex, of course, Lewis Hamilton was right behind him, and he not only lost one position, he lost 2 positions, and at least managed to gain 1 place back by Charles Leclerc, allowing him to get ahead again, as per the rules, because if Ferrari hadn't told Charles to do it, it would have been a 5-place penalty, and I think Charles would ultimately finish somewhere around 9th position. So it was a good job he did do that, because the stewards were onto it and they were about to investigate, but they did take no further action, bearing in mind that Charles let him pass. But yes, absolutely, Williams, Alex Albon, and Carlos Sainz, obviously in a really good place right now. They are looking very, very strong for that 5th place in the Constructors' Championship, that's for sure.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that the conditions today were perfect for Lewis Hamilton. A team the conditions were far from perfect for is Mercedes. Again, the hot temperatures are seemingly being their kryptonite, and it's a weird one. George Russell really not happy with the performance of the car in Imola. Kimi Antonelli, of course, having a gutting retirement in what is very much his home race. A day to forget for Mercedes. Not said that too many times this year.
Yeah, I know. You got to feel sorry for Kimi because, as I mentioned, post qualifying and what happened there, that this was so much open expectation, and he was so wanting to do well, and naturally so. This is his true home race, not Monza to a certain extent, because I've mentioned previously, he's born just 30 minutes away in the city of Bologna, and we're coming to it with such passion, not least because Bologna won the Coppa Italia on Wednesday night, and he was in Bologna celebrating that as well. And so, yes, just wanting to do so well, and ultimately, everything that could go wrong for him ultimately did go wrong. And then for George Russell, the car just not working for him. He felt something was wrong at the rear from the very start. And that's why I thought it was really strange, and you probably noticed as well, despite the front 3 ahead of him, George in 4th was really producing a DRS train behind him. And you wouldn't
Yeah.
have expected that from Mercedes. You would have expected George to at least, been up there fighting with the 2 McLarens and with Max Verstappen in his Red Bull. It just never materialized. So quite clearly, something not right with that car. And George even radioed through at one point and said he could feel something severely wrong at the car. Mercedes looked at it, cleared it, and in the end, it just never really worked out. The conditions didn't work out. George described the race overall as an absolute disaster. And it's the first time this season across all Grand Prix and both sprints that he's not finished in the top 5 positions. So yes, a lot to look at for Mercedes, a lot to investigate, to work out just what it was wrong with that car. Not short period of time, obviously, because we've got Monaco right around the corner in a few days' time.
And just finally, Ian, Fernando Alonso, his wait for a point this season goes on. Had an amazing Saturday, qualified in 5th. Aston Martin with a huge upgrades package, which again, based in qualifying, seems to be working really, really well. And Fernando was, for the opening stages, looking set for a really good points finish. The Aston Martin car working well. But another driver who was not helped by the virtual safety car caused by Esteban Ocon. In the closing stages, he finished 11th in the end when he realised he would not be able to overtake Tsunoda for 10th. Took both hands off the steering wheel and slapped himself on the helmet. You've got to feel the frustration because Aston Martin this weekend is the best they've looked all year.
Oh, you got to feel a bit sorry for Fernando. And one of his radio messages, if people hadn't heard that, describing himself as the unluckiest driver in the world, because it was one of those where the strategy, which was working, really well for him and Aston Martin, just completely unraveled with that virtual safety car initially following the Esteban Ocon incident. And from there on in, it was Aston and Fernando and Lance, obviously, because he did also start in the top 10 and he could have scored points as well. It just never worked out for them. And you just felt for him as well. That moment when he slapped both hands on his helmet, taking both hands off his steering wheel,
Yeah.
We'll leave Fernando to do that. We know what he's all about. We know he's experienced enough to get away with it. But yes, you could feel his frustration. You could feel his pain at that particular point. You've got to hope that at least with the way the Aston has performed reasonably well across this weekend, that the upgrades on this car have worked, that it will come right, that he will get in the points eventually at some stage. But right now, 7 races without a point. I think, if I'm right in saying, this is Fernando's worst start to a Formula One season since his days with Minardi. So that tells you, that very first season with Minardi. So that goes to show just how desperate it is for him at this stage.
Maybe it'll come to him in Monaco. Ian, amazing stuff as always. To those, of course, who have been watching this F1 update, please do let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, what you made of the race, any of our talking points, and your thoughts looking ahead to Monaco. Ian and I will be back on Monday for the podcast, and it's one you do not want to miss. Just giving you a little hint. Please do make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. And as mentioned, we'll see you on Monday for the podcast. See you later.
I'll give them a small hint. We do have another special guest.
Go on.
I'm not going to say who it is. Tune in, folks. But thank you ever so much. We'll see you on Monday. And of course, Monaco just around the corner. We'll see you in a few days' time. Take care until then.